And now let's all take a deep breath together and prepare to bring our attention to this place in this moment. Whatever was worrying you before you arrived, it can wait for an hour. Whatever you have to face after you leave today, it will still be there, and it doesn't need you right now. Let us be here together for this brief, holy moment. Our call to worship this morning is a sonnet I wrote for the occasion called America. Your beauty is unspeakable. You fill the heart with hope and joy. Mountain and shore, prairie and city, rushing rivers roar, forest and meadow, midnight lake, so still. And we who know our country's native grace, who sing our songs of praise, who make our pledge, who stand in silence at the ocean's edge, are we then worthy of this bounteous place? Are we as generous as waves of grain, as open-hearted as the mighty trees? Are we prepared to suffer some unease so others might be finally done with pain? America, so beautiful, so free, oh, may we be as beautiful as thee. Before we turn to the centering music, I would like to say something about the theme of the service. You'll hear different emphases in the words of the three speakers, Dianne McRae, Glenn Rohlfing, and Julie Feuerbach. But I think all three speakers will, in one way or another, touch on both the beauty of the American dream and its incompleteness in practice as it stands today. Similarly, most of the music today honors the American dream in its struggles for justice. Justice for LGBT people, justice for laborers, justice for people of color. Listen to the many struggles for justice and well-being when Joe sings, "We shall be free." I hope today will remind you that this land was made for you and me, and for all the others who call this land home. The chalice lighting reading today is by Walt Whitman. The genius of the United States is not best or most in its executives or legislatures, nor in its ambassadors or authors or colleges or churches or parlors, nor even in its newspapers or inventors, but always most in the common people. We light our chalice in gratitude for those Whitman called the common people of the United States of America, whose lives are at the heart of the country and who are truly the genius of our land.
What I titled mine is Do Art, Be Kind, on creativity and liberty. When I talked to my folks a couple of days ago and told them about this service, they said, what's happening in your life and all? And I said, I'm going to be doing the service. And that I said that we're considering freedom and liberty. They immediately, and in what I took to be a disapproving tone, asked if we were also looking at responsibility. Naturally I answered, of course, imagining that they were probably thinking something to the effect of those damn liberals always going on about freedom and in such an irresponsible way. Well, they did teach me well, as I would guess that your parents did too. And I cannot even think of liberty without thinking also of the responsibilities that come with it. I expect that my idea of the responsibilities that come with our freedoms are different than what my folks might have had in mind. I know for sure that we do agree on the responsibility and freedom of informed voting, for instance. We have a responsibility to listen to the arguments on many different sides of issues before deciding which parts of each argument make the most sense and resonate in our hearts. I have a responsibility to share in the burdens of providing for public services that I might not even use. It's still important to pay for schools when I don't have kids in them, for roads that I may never drive on, for police and fire services that I may never use. So I joyfully pay taxes that support all of these that serve the public good. Thank you. That's so important. Support of the ecosystems in which we are inextricably embedded is both a freedom and responsibility. Leonardo da Vinci wrote, "Study the science of art. Study the art of science. Develop your senses, especially learn how to see. Realize that everything connects to everything else." Instructed by his wisdom and that of earth, whose heartbeat I feel under my feet and within my very heart, I believe that we have an obligation to use as much of my understanding, well, I believe that I have an obligation to use as much of my understanding as I can to summon at one time together to live in balance within the local and the larger environments. These all seem to me to add up to the phrase, be kind. The word kind has its origins in kin, that to which we are related. So the idea is that we treat all as we do those for whom we have the greatest concern, our family, either that of origin or of choice. An internet search yielded the source of a postcard that I saw some years ago. It said, "Do art, be kind." It's the mission statement of the Youth Arts Collective of Monterey, California. That saying has stuck with me for a lot of years now. It may seem like a bit of a stretch to say that do art, be kind, speaks to liberty and the responsibilities that go with it, but please bear with me here for a moment. The part that says do art speaks to me of the freedom that we enjoy in this nation. We and those who preceded us have the opportunity to be creative in our approach to our relationships and activities. We do not have to take someone else's word for what makes the best sense politically, artistically, in social arrangements, or where we find spiritual truth. Living our lives artistically gives us tremendous freedom. The be kind part of it is, of course, that as we are living our lives creatively, we consider each of our actions, the influence that they have on our joy and that of those who are our kin in the broadest sense of the word. An anonymous source advises, feel free to make mistakes. It's how we learn, create new ideas, try out and discard inaccuracies. This asks me the question, from what do I need to free myself in order to become as creative as I am able? Am I bound by restrictions that I learned from my family when I was growing up? Well, Thich Nhat Hanh advises that freedom is not given to us by anyone. We have to cultivate it ourselves. It is a daily practice. I cannot simply live in the headspace I was presented with by my parents or professors. I am obliged to risk making mistakes, to pull apart and consider in every moment my actions and relationships to every other piece of existence. The second part, be kind, puts the constraints on my art. If I let my exploration, my social interactions, and spiritual pursuits be guided by kindness, using both head and heart, I treat my liberty responsibly. So I urge you to continue with me to be kind, do art, to act with a deeply loving and informed consideration of others, as well as ourselves, always in mind and in heart, as we paint a larger liberty.
How wonderful it is that just a few months ago, led by Cindy, Julie, Alcida, and Josh, the middle schoolers did a survey, right, of the congregation, and they looked at basically, where did we start out, right, in our religiosity? Where did we start out in our belief systems? And how did we evolve over time? And I think that is just a beautiful analogy to basically what our country is really all about and based on. Could you imagine, by the way, some of the results in regards to that survey, that some of us, are pagan, others are Buddhists, right? Some went from fundamentalism, right, to just a more liberal brand of Christianity. Can we actually say that that occurred 100 years ago? So today what I would like to do is I would like to just basically kind of relate that experience to the experience of our nation. And that we have these competing narratives of freedom. Okay? Americans sometimes forget, states Eric Foner, a historian of Reconstruction, that things we considered fixed and timeless are constantly changing and contested. The story of freedom is not a mystical saga with a predetermined beginning and conclusion, but an open-ended history of accomplishment and failure. A record of people forever contending about the crucial ideas of their political culture. In the extended conversation over time, the meaning of freedom is as multifaceted, contentious, and ever-changing as America itself. Foner reminds us then that there are many narratives about our story of freedom. And I can tell you, the last couple of days I've been really kind of looking at which ones I wanted to present to you, because there's so many famous narratives out there. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, right? Alice Paul, Dr. Martin Luther King. I would like to actually present one to you that was both contentious and vibrant in the mid-19th century. And actually, in my research and studying this, I found out some fascinating things. John C. Calhoun. Y'all might remember the mid-19th century was a senator. He was also, by the way, a vice president, okay, under Andrew Jackson. And he was a Democrat from South Carolina, right? Born in the hinterlands of South Carolina. He was about states' rights. He was about pro-slavery. Did you all know that he also was a Unitarian Universalist? And established, by the way, the Unitarian Universalist Church in 1828 in Washington, D.C. Isn't it interesting how we change, right, over time? Okay? And I just give you a sense of Calhoun. He is the individual who argued that slavery was indeed a positive good. That in fact, by the way, that plantation owners who essentially expanded out to the hinterlands of the countryside, the yeoman farmers, they were basically helping to keep the poor white trash, if you will, right, in check. Isn't it a fascinating point of view? Right? He also, by the way, was against David Wilmot and the Wilmot Proviso Act. As you might remember, in the mid-19th century, our country was expanding. Here it is, right here. John Gash's painting, Manifest Destiny. It's actually called American Progress as its real title, but it comes basically then to be known or symbolizes the expansion of ideas of Manifest Destiny. That is, that God has predetermined, right, Americans to conquer, right, the West, to subjugate it, to bring a sense of paternalism. Paternalism to whom? Well, paternalism to African Americans who were slaves, people as chattel. Paternalism to who? The Mexicans. Think of the Mexican-American War of 1848. As well as also, you see, Native Americans. Now, I know this one's a little hard to see, but that's Native Americans running away from Lady Liberty. Okay? Competing narratives of freedom. What did it mean to be free? And oddly enough, it's a Republican by the name of Frederick Douglass, who was a slave in the South, in Maryland, right, before he had escaped. And he had argued that basically all individuals needed to be free and equal. Women, African Americans, Native Americans, right? And honestly comes out completely against the Constitution in some ways, although he respected the Constitution. But he said there's a flaw, and there had been a flaw ever since the establishment of the Constitution. And let me just backtrack for a moment and let you think about this for a second. When our Constitution was originally ratified, if you were not a white male who owned more than 40 acres of property, you did not have the liberty to vote. Why? Because freedom was based initially in religion and not a part of a political process. That struggle has to come over time. Here's what Frederick Douglass said. Fellow citizens, above your nation, tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wails of millions whose change, heavily and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. If I do forget, if I do not faithfully remember those bleeding children to sorrow this day, may my right hand forget her cunning, and may my tongue cleave the roof of my mouth. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with the popular theme would be treason most scandalous and shocking, and would make me a reproach before God and the world. My subject then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day and its popular characteristics from the slave's point of view, standing there identified with the American bondsman, making his wrongs mine. I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on the 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declaration of the past or the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future. Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on the occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call into question and to denounce with all the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not use severe language I cannot command, and yet no one word shall escape me than any man whose judgment is not binded by prejudice, or who he is not at heart a slaveholder, shall not confess to be right and just. Competing narratives of freedom. That evolution over time, folks, right, ended up giving us the 15th Amendment after the Civil War during Reconstruction. And while African Americans legally had, men that is, legally had the right to vote, we see another struggle for the narrative of freedom. Literacy tests were basically put in place, right, to prevent African Americans in the South, as well, by the way, in the North, from voting. Okay? And here it is, when we start to think about, right, just even these suffragettes for freedom. You know, it's Frederick Douglass who goes to Seneca Falls and supports Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1848 for the bid for women to have the right to vote. But believe it or not, at one point in time, they actually diverged from each other. Because the 15th Amendment did not just give, right, you know, it didn't give women the right to vote, it only gave African American men the right to vote. But when we start to think about, over time, the struggles of individuals who stand up and voice their opinions against injustice, our country has responded. And there has to be some positive that we need to take away from that. You know, the past weekend when I was reading Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech and Eric Foner's The Study of American Freedom, and thinking about what has transpired over the last couple of weeks, we are truly fortunate, dare I even say, blessed to live in a country where our citizens have the opportunity to petition our legal system, to advocate openly for rights, to dissent openly and peacefully without violence and discrimination, civility. The evolution of our history is a promising one. Even now and then, right? Every now and then, I should say, compassion and love, principles important to our UU values, overcome ignorance, animosity, and hate. The liberty that defines our freedom in American culture should never belong to a select few, and should always welcome those who prize liberty, compassion, and peace, no matter their race, religion, political leanings, or creed. What I do admire about the Universal Unitarian Church is that it gives us the space and the freedom for us to undergo our own struggle, to have our own beautiful dialogues with each other that basically help to foster our own growth. Like our country, we are multifaceted, contentious, and ever-changing. All of us, some more than others, have experienced that struggle because of activists like Frederick Douglass, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Alice Paul, Dr. Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, and Elizabeth Windsor. We are more free than ever before. Let us remember the struggles of those who championed freedom in our past. And like liberty's torch, let the Universal Unitarians light the way to freedom, compassion, and love in our future.
So those of you who know me will not be surprised that when they asked me to talk today about liberty, that I of course went straight to social justice. So while preparing this talk, I came across the July 4th, 2012 address by John Stocks, the Executive Director of the National Education Association, who called its members to action with the following words: "Our American DNA is embedded with a profound sense of possibility, an unshakable belief in a better tomorrow, an abiding faith that the American dream is not only real, but a belief that there are many Americans who are willing to ensure that it is truly accessible for everyone." He continued, "Too often, we overlook the part of our national portrait that celebrates those Americans who are driven by their conscience to make America a more perfect union. Those who are constantly urging America to live up to its promise of equal opportunity and justice for all." Finally, John Stocks went on to say the following: "I have a name for people who are divinely dissatisfied with America, yet love America's promise. I call them social justice patriots." I love Stocks' idea of a social justice patriot. In this address, he so eloquently voiced the essence of what I hope to impart about liberty and patriotism on this Independence Day weekend. His message resonates deeply with me. Our Unitarian Universalist history is rich with examples of those who lived as social justice patriots, people who embodied their faith by working for social reform and to end the oppressions of their time. I believe this is fundamental to being a UU. We are doers. Social justice work is how we live our faith. And so this morning, I want to talk about being a social justice patriot and why I think it is so important for each of us to heed the call of our Unitarian Universalist Association to stand on the side of love and to actively work to ensure equality and justice for all. For many Americans, July 4th is a day for celebration and love of country. We put on our red, white, and blue, listen to patriotic music, watch fireworks, and revel with family and friends as we honor America and her promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'm not saying there is anything wrong with this. There is much about this country that I love and celebrate and for which I am grateful. But for many Americans, this ideal of equality and freedom that we celebrate is not a reality. Recently, I came across an incredibly powerful TED Talk by a Harvard University doctoral candidate named Clint Smith. Filmed in March 2015, the title of his talk was "How to Raise a Black Son in America." Have any of you watched this? Some of you? If you have not seen it, I strongly encourage you to do so. It is a personal narrative about a truth in America that I find heartbreaking and infuriating. There are things that white kids in our country are free to do that black kids are not. Partway through this short talk, Smith relates a childhood story about being 12 years old on an overnight field trip to another city. He and his friends brought super soakers, you know, those extra large water guns that kids love, and as 12-year-old boys will do, commenced an epic outdoor battle where they hid behind cars and ran laughing through the darkness, avoiding those areas illuminated by the streetlights. He goes on to recount how within 10 minutes his father came outside, grabbed his forearm, and led him into his room. As he tells it, his father, quote, looked me in the eye, fear consuming his face, and said, "Son, I'm sorry, but you can't act the same as your white friends. You can't pretend to shoot guns. You can't run around in the dark. You can't hide behind anything other than your own teeth." End quote. I am the mother of 2 boys, both baseball players, which meant we spent a lot of summer nights in hotels when we were out of town for tournaments. Nights that the team, 12 to 14 high-energy boys, spent doing things like having super soaker battles, just like Clint Smith and his friends. Unlike Clint's father, however, I didn't have to worry that running around in the dark and hiding behind things while pretending to shoot guns can somehow put my sons in danger of being perceived as something other than what they were. Young boys, outside, being kids, and having fun. You see, my white sons weren't burdened by the negative stereotypes and societal bias that, sadly, equates young black men with danger. My sons can cover their heads with hoodies, drive or walk through upscale neighborhoods, or chase each other with super soakers in a hotel parking lot without worrying that someone might get the wrong idea about their intentions. Their whiteness affords them a privilege, a freedom not currently available to all Americans. This, along with many other examples of inequality and injustice present in the United States, is why I am a social justice patriot. I love America's promise of what this country can be, and I'm encouraged by the progress that has been made toward achieving it. But we have a long way to go. I am thrilled with the recent Supreme Court ruling making marriage equality the law in all 50 states. But until my LGBTQ friends can walk down any street in this country proudly holding hands without fear of someone throwing insults or worse at them, America's promise of equality and justice for all has not yet been met. Until women are getting equal pay for equal work, America's promise has not yet been met. Until the American dream is truly achievable for all, regardless of one's circumstances of birth, America's promise has not yet been met. And until a father can send his young black son outside to play without fear that he won't come home because someone mistook his toy gun for a real one and reacted with deadly force, America's promise has not yet been met. So as we continue to celebrate America's independence today, think about what it means to be a patriot. In my opinion, one of the most patriotic things we can do is hold America accountable to her promise of equality and justice for all. Together, we must work to make America a more perfect union.
My friends, may all our lives be a great work of creativity in both seeing the distance between where we are and where we aspire to be as a country, and in closing the gap so that we become someday as beautiful as the country we love. Amen and blessed be. And now please join me in the closing affirmation. Nurtured
by this community, inspired by all we share, may our actions carry this love forward into our lives and into the world every day.
The service is ended. May our service to the world begin.